Just days after the wife of a police officer made allegations of abuse against her husband, he claimed she took her own life by shooting herself. The medical examiner ruled Amanda Perrault's death a suicide, but the sheriff and district attorney investigating this case believe her husband, Seth Perrault, shot and killed her. Anne-Marie Green, on assignment for 48 hours, investigates the case.
It was February 3rd, 2020, when Seth Perrault, then a police officer for the city of Eatonton, Georgia, reported his 44-year-old wife, Amanda, had shot and killed herself. Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills was in charge of the investigation.
He said that they were in bed and they were arguing, and then all of a sudden, she just produced the gun out of thin air and executed herself.
But Sills says from the start, he wasn't buying Perrault's story. For one thing, the crime scene didn't look like a suicide to the sheriff.
Her body is flat on her back, her legs are almost together, and her arms are tucked against her side with her hands cupped. This wasn't right.
Also of concern to Sills was the way this Smith & Wesson .380, which belonged to Seth Perrault, was found lying next to Amanda's body with its magazine ejected.
The magazine, it was near her right side, and the pistol itself was way down here below her left foot.
There's something not adding up.
District Attorney Wright Barksdale points to the fact that just 6 days before Amanda Perrault's death, she had called 911 and had her husband arrested on charges of simple battery and family violence. The next day, he made bond.
I think he hid behind a badge and wore a mask every day. Nice house, law enforcement. But behind that door to that house, he was pretty abusive.
Based in part on the crime scene and allegations of abuse, Barksdale charged 44-year-old Perrault with murder. But 7 months later, the medical examiner in the case issued her report, ruling Amanda Perrault's death a suicide.
And Anne-Marie joins us now with more on this story. So, Anne-Marie, we've been talking about this all morning long.
We've been talking about it longer than that,
I know,
actually.
it's true. We've been talking about it throughout the course of your reporting. What is the defense's case here?
So this is really interesting. The defense is leaning into the science. They have the medical examiner's conclusion that it was a suicide. And, you know, they put her on the stand. She was grilled by the prosecution. She did not change her story. But then there's other evidence, too, or lack of evidence. There was a lot of blood in the bedroom where Amanda was shot. Seth Perrault had almost no blood on him. One tiny little droplet of blood on his pants. The gunpowder residue. He had trace amounts on his hands, on his body. You know, nothing surprising. He's a police officer. Right. But you would expect if he had recently shot a gun, there would be much more than just trace amounts of gunpowder residue. So that's what they're leaning into.
And we're seeing just some of the evidence that you've walked us through on the screen. What does Seth Perrault say happened? Because the way that the county sheriff lays things out, he seems to say it's improbable she killed herself.
Right.
But what does Seth say happened?
So Seth says that he doesn't know exactly what happened, that he was on the bed with her and they were arguing, but he wasn't looking at her at the time. Look, this was not a good marriage. They fought a lot. Seth admits he fought a lot with her, but he says he never abused her. And when she called 911 and accused him of abuse, she said, or he says, that was an absolute lie. But the end result was he was arrested. When a police officer gets arrested for possible abuse, he could lose his job. And there was also a possibility that he would lose custody of his young daughter, who he had just gained custody of from a previous relationship. And he says that Amanda was so guilty, she felt so guilty that she ended his life. And he says that he has proof of what her state of mind was like at the time.
But there is also proof that you and I spoke about, which is that there was a drop of blood on Seth.
A tiny drop.
Tiny drop. And also you point out in the clip that we saw that the body if you're going to take your own life with a gun, why was the gun at her feet?
Yeah.
And why were her arms at her side?
Yeah.
These are the questions. I mean, that's the tease, right?
And that's what really bothered the sheriff, right? He's been a sheriff for a really long time. They say he grew up in the courthouse because he's been so involved in law enforcement for, you could almost say generational because his parents were involved in that. But he looked at the body and said, there's no way. This is not a normal way for a body to fall if someone was to shoot themselves. Seth is kind of all over the place. You know, the sheriff's asked, like, did you touch the body in any way? Initially, he says no. And then later he says, I don't know, I might have hugged her. So, you know.
All sounds strange and unusual.
It is very unusual. It's a very unusual case. You know, watch it and tell me what you guys think.
We'll be debriefing on Monday. Anne-Marie, great to have you in studio as a guest.
I know, this is actually
These
weird.
are weird.
I want to be
Weird.
like, move over. I'm going to read a few lines.
You look at that too. Great
Thank
reporting,
you.
Anne-Marie. Thank you.
You can see Anne-Marie's report the death of an officer's wife on 48 Hours tomorrow night at 10/9 Central, right on CBS and on Paramount+.